Hi everyone, I am Sogbohossou, a postdoc researcher at the Biosystematics Group of Wageningen University and also affiliated to the University of Abomey-Calavi in Benin. And today I will tell you a little bit about how ethnicity affected uses and management of spider plants in Benin and Togo, two West African countries. So what is spider plant? It's leafy vegetable that is popular in parts of sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia. And it's also a medicinal plant. It's rich in vitamins and also other uh, phytochemicals like flavonoids or glucosinolates, which are beneficial for human health. And it's found near human settlements most of the time, either cultivated or growing in the wild. But what we call wild most of the time is just plants that escape from cultivation because it's a plant that easily propagates. So we were interested in studying spider plant uh, to actually look at the variation in different parts of the world in morphology, but also in nutritional value, so as to start breeding programs for the species for improved leaf yield and nutritional value. So uh, we started germplasm collection missions in 2015, and we went to several West African countries. And it's during those missions that we realized that the plant doesn't really have the same value for all the communities where we went, and that the uses, the management, and the perceived economic importance of the plant was really different in different communities. So we were interested in um, knowing more about how those differences arose and what are the reasons behind them. So what we noticed was that in some communities, the plant is harvested in the wild. Sometimes it's maintained when it grows spontaneously in people's backyard or on roadsides. Some people also cultivate it in home gardens for subsistence and commercialization. And we noticed that in Togo, especially in the south, it's really part of their market gardening system. So it's a commercial crop for them. So the main research question that our study tried to answer were to which extent does the traditional knowledge and management practices of spider plant vary in our study area? What were the key factors influencing such traditional knowledge and management practices? And would farmers be willing to improve their current management practices? So we work mainly in Benin, which is a small country in West Africa, which is home to over 50 social linguistic groups. So more than 50 languages are spoken in the country. That can be uh, classified in 12 main groups, actually. And like many other developing countries, agriculture is the dominant sector. And based on our germplasm collection missions and our observations, we selected 7 social linguistic groups that we thought or that we observed had different perceptions and management of spider plant. So in total, we worked with 428 respondents. So the first group uh, of people that we selected were the Fon in Benin, who tend to harvest the plant in the wild, the Aja, who tend to cultivate the species in home gardens, and then in Togo, the Ewe, because they have a more advanced production system and they commercialize the plant already. So those three social linguistic groups belong to the bigger Bay group. And here you can see, for example, this lady is um, uh, harvesting the plant in her backyard, as you can see here. And here you see a garden in Togo, so the Ewe, and you can see clearly that there are plots and it's irrigated and they sell it commercially. And here you see a man uh, harvesting the leaves in the wild. So the practices are very different depending on the place where you go. So the second group that we're interested in is the Ede group, so the Holi, who live in the Weme Valley in southern Benin, and they also tend to harvest the plant in the wild. We were actually surprised by that because the Weme Valley is considered as the food valley of Benin, and it's a region where people cultivate a lot of different crops, fruits, cereals, but also a lot of vegetables along water bodies like lakes and rivers. And so the third group was the Gur group, which included the Gumanche in the north and the Wama. So in those two groups, practices were uh, kind of similar. So people harvesting in the wild or sometimes cultivating in home gardens. And you will see that the landscape is already much more different because those communities live in mountain regions. So here you see a bit where the Wama and the Gumanche live. So it's more mountainous and also quite dry compared with the first two groups that we saw in the south. And the last group that we selected was the group of the Songhai, so the Zelma, who originally come from Niger, and they moved to Benin for trade most of the time. And they also have a good knowledge of spider plant in Niger, but they tended to stop cultivating when they came to Benin because there was not a high demand in the crop in Benin. At least that's what they explained. Group, sorry, that group also sometimes cultivate the plant in home gardens, and here you can see them drying the leaves. Why? Because uh, in that area it's already a bit more dry, so you are getting closer to the Sahel, and drying leaves is a way of making sure that the whole year they can have access to vegetables. So it's a way for them to store and conserve the plant for longer. The social demographic characteristics of our respondents included the age, gender, instruction level, land ownership, source of income, duration of residency or migration. So those are all data that we collected. And then we computed the cultural significance index, which is based on the number of reported uses of the plant, the source of knowledge, so whether they get the knowledge from their parents or other members of the community or the media, the perceived availability of the species, so is it abundant or do they think it's rarefying in their area? The frequency of uses, is it every day, once a week, once a month, once in a while, and so on and so forth, and also the last day of consumption to be able to confirm the frequency of uses, the different plant parts that are used, the food preparation, so how is the plant cooked when they use it as food, how is it cooked, how do they like the taste of it compared with other leafy vegetables that they also use, how do they harvest. What we mean there is, do they allocate some particular time to harvesting the plant on purpose, or is it that they just harvest occasionally if they find it while they are, I don't know, walking to their farm, they see it on the roadside and then they just stop, harvest and continue, or is it that they really have dedicated harvest of the plant? And that says also something about how important that plant is for them. The possibilities of commercialization. So is it commercialized in their area or do they just share it if it's available? And finally, the medicinal value. So is it perceived as a medicinal plant as such, or is it just a food plant for them? For the management index, we included the different activities around taking care of the plant. So do they water it? Do they fertilize it? Do they weed it? All these data were collected. Do they select specific plants? So that's artificial selection. Do they select specific phenotypes based on, for example, the size of the leaves or the color of the stem? How do they react if some people come and harvest the plants that are growing on their farm or at home or even on roadsides near their houses? How do they perceive that? Is it something that hurts them to the point that they can ask the person to give it back or something? Or is it just normal for them that anybody can come and harvest the plants without their permission? Also, the proximity to the collection or cultivation site, so how close is their residency place to the places where they collect or cultivate the plant. And finally, the management forms. So for the management forms, we had 5 forms. The simple collection without any selection, the tolerance, protection, or promotion, also without any selection, the transplantation of selected spontaneous individuals, the rain-fed cultivation, which is what we observe the most in home gardens, and the intensive irrigated cultivation all year round, which is what we observe um, in Togo. And another aspect that we wanted to know about was whether they were interested in improving their current management practices. Because remember, our first goal is to promote the plant and um, allow more people to have access to it and diversify their diets. So we asked them if they were satisfied with their current level of use of the plant and their current level of management. If not, then what would they like to improve and what would it take for them to improve their management practices? And what would be the constraint related to implementing their wishes, if if that happened to be. To compare the use values and the frequency of uses between our different social linguistic groups, we use the Kruskal-Wallis test to be able to predict the variation in cultural significance index based on all the social demographic variables that we collected. We used the regression tree analysis. And to determine the social demographic factors affecting management practices, we used the generalized linear model with Poisson distribution. And finally, to assess the association between ethnicity, which was the main factor that we identified based on the two previous analyses that I just mentioned, and the knowledge and management of the species, we used the principal component analysis based on cultural significance index, management intensity, and economic value. So what did we observe? We observed that most of our respondents were women in all ethnic groups except for the Ewe, and spider plant users were between 14 and 90 years old, with an average of 45 years old. And landowners represented 66% of our respondents, except in the Ewe group where most of the market gardeners leased the land to cultivate, because they are also present in more urban areas. Spider plant was used as food by all our respondents. 50.7% of them knew that the species could be used as a medicinal plant, and they mentioned in total 42 different diseases for which the plant is used. Those included tonic, inflammation, skin diseases, digestive system disorders, cardiovascular diseases, and so on. And also, the plant is used for spiritual purposes by 5% of our respondents. Those include attracting positivity and money in people's lives, and also solving conflicts. And on that picture, the top one, you see the plant on a local market. And on the bottom picture, the lady who is harvesting the plant is considered as a priestess or something like that. So she has a spiritual position in the society, and so she is one of the people who explain to us how the plant can be used for spiritual purposes. When we look at the social demographic factors affecting cultural significance, we notice that ethnicity is the main factor explaining the variation in cultural significance index. Actually, the Aja and Ewe were separated from other social linguistic groups, and we could already expect that because those two ethnicities already cultivate the species. Age was also an important factor, so older respondents gave a higher cultural importance to the species than younger respondents, and that happened within the Aja and Ewe, but also for other social linguistic groups. And finally, income, land tenure, and education also influenced to a lower extent the cultural significance index values. So the principal component analysis that we did was based on the cultural significance index and management index for variables, the economic value, and also the medicinal uses of the plant. So what we observe is that on the x-axis, there is a clear separation between the social linguistic groups. So the Aja and the Ewe in black and red have a higher economic value, uh, um, uses, and management index for the plant compared with the other social linguistic groups. And when we look at the y-axis, we observe that the Zerma in yellow and the Aja in black have higher knowledge about the plant uses and also the medicinal uses of the plant in those communities is higher. When we look at the willingness to improve current management practices, what we notice first is that the EV are not willing to change, and that makes sense because they are really intensively managing the plant. The Agile are interested in moving up to a more intensified management practices, not anymore in home gardens, but more in a commercial way. The Wama, the Gumanche, the Fon, and the Holi are really interested in cultivating the plant, provided that they have access to training on how to cultivate it, and that we do some preliminary job about um, consumers' awareness of the importance of the plant, the nutritional value, and so on. So if there is a market, they are interested in improving their management practices. And finally, for the Zerma, we observe that they are not really willing to change anything because first, they think that there is no market for the species where they live now. And second, they have limited access to land because they are migrants. So they think that whatever land they have now should be used for much more interesting crops in terms of economic value. So what we can keep from this study is that first, the cultural importance of the species and the management practices were very diverse, but strongly influenced by ethnicity, gender, and to a lesser extent, age, education, and land tenure. Second, the convergence of knowledge that we observe between communities with similar sociocultural and ecological contexts. So when I take the Aja and the Ewe, for example, who uh, cultivate the species and sell it on local markets, they belong to the same group compared with, for example, the Wama and the Gumonche, who are in the north and do not have that same level of management of the species. So sociocultural and ecological contexts really matter as well. The third thing is that when we take the Songhai, so the Zerma coming from Niger, we realize that migration and the lack of market opportunities really determine their decision not to cultivate the species but only harvest it in the wild. So in places where spider plant is already uh, used but still harvested in the wild, it's possible to promote it by consumers awareness campaigns, but also by training farmers, especially women who are already used to harvesting the plant for cooking or for medicinal uses. And so for that promotion activity, we identified now entry points, which are the phone, the Comanche, and the Holi, who can be the people with whom we start those promotion activities so that it spread gradually to the rest of the country. So if you are interested in knowing more about the study, I put the link to the article itself at the end of this slide so you can um, have a look. And of course, if you have any questions, you can also ask them. Thank you very much for your attention.